Welcome back to Strenuous Conversations. Took a bit of a break in doing these episodes for a little while. I was in New York City doing some COVID work, and then I didn't really kettlebell when I got back because I damaged my arm while I was there. But we're back, we're getting into it. We're gonna finish up the second to last section of the Hound of Heaven. A little behind the clock today, so I'm trying to get going as quickly as possible. So the second to last section of the poem it's what I call the emo section. It's a series of rapid fire images. He goes quickly from one image to the next. All of the images are designed to say basically how bad he's messed up his life. This is something that's very familiar to anybody who's ever worked with an addict or been an addict or cared for an addict. This theme of how badly I screwed up. But very few of them express it quite as eloquently as Francis Thompson. He begins, "Naked I wait thy love's uplifted stroke. My harness, piece by piece thou hast hewn from me, and smitten me to my knee. I am defenseless utterly. And in this line, he commits one of my pet peeves in poetry in the English language, that of ending a rhyme that's supposed to have a stressed foot on the last syllable. He ends it with the ly ending. I am defenseless utterly. And every single time, it doesn't matter who does it. John Donne does it all the time. Can't stand it there either. At least they're not rhyming it. At least he's not rhyming it using it as an I sound, as they sometimes do. Neither here nor there. Everybody has their pet peeves. Nobody's perfect. Naked I wait thy love's uplifted stroke. My harness, piece by piece, thou hast hewn from me. Harness is an older English term for the armor that knights used to wear. And a lot of the old Arthurian timer keeps timing out. The older Arthurian authors, this is a common theme in some of the battle scenes. I think I remember it from Mallory. It's definitely from Roger Lansing Green. The idea that the knights get into this fight and they're hitting each other so hard, they're chopping each other's armor to pieces, but somehow not damaging themselves. And there's perhaps here a nod to the consummate skill of the of Thompson's opponent. My harness, piece by piece, that has hewn from me, makes it sound kind of deliberate, like we're fighting, and there goes your pauldron, there goes your greaves, there goes your chest plate. Yeah, your cuirass. You have and smitten me to my knee. So I've taken his armor completely away from him and then finished the fight by knocking him down. He's on his knees, he has no defense. So, very brief image, about 4 lines, and then he immediately switches to a second. I slept, methinks, and woke, and slowly gazing, find me stripped in sleep. Now, the image is of him waking up, again naked, but this time naked because he was asleep. He stripped himself to go to bed. And slowly gazing, find me stripped in sleep. 2 lines, another, and then he jumps to another image. In the rash lustihood of my young powers, I shook the pillaring hours and pulled my life upon me. This is a reference, of course, to Samson. In the rash lustihood of my own powers, meaning I was young and stupid, and I just did things in my life. I shook the pillaring hours and pulled my life upon me. Grimed with smears, I stand amid the dust of the mounded years. My mangled youth lies dead beneath the heap. Samson, a great Hebrew warrior of the Old Testament, the book of Judges, but he betrayed his covenant with God and so lost his superhuman strength. But he renewed that covenant. And while that covenant was renewed, he shook the pillars of this giant temple and brought down the roof on himself and thousands of his enemies. Thompson compares himself to Samson, which is a bit of a far-flung analogy because we know that Thompson was a weak, sickly, and by the standards of the world, ineffectual man. Yet it is his strength that has brought about his undoing. Come on. I hate this program because it's on my computer and I don't have my computer plugged in. So it times out every 2 minutes or so. So he finishes this image of himself as Samson, pulling resisting his enemies, pulling these pillars and dropping the building on himself. And then he goes to immediately to another image. This is a red letter day. My left arm is stronger than my right. It's because my right is damaged. My days have crackled and gone up in smoke, have puffed and burst as sun starts on a stream. Returning to this nature imagery. His life is something ephemeral, like smoke or sun starts. What's a sun start? If you're walking in the woods and you come across a stream and you see the shafts of sunlight floating through the mist that comes up off the stream, that's his life. It's puffed, it's burst as sun starts on a stream, or the sunlight reflecting on the water as it tumbles over rocks. Immediately goes into another image. Yea, faileth now even dream the dreamer, and lute the lutenist. Even the linked fantasies in whose blossomy twist I swung the earth a trinket at my wrist are yielding. Chords of all too weak account for earth, with heavy griefs so o'erplussed. He's talking now about his love of fiction, his love of poetry, of the fantasies, and the songs of poets, and all these things that he's used as a barrier against the real world. Yea, faileth now even dream the dreamer, and lute the lutenist. The dreams and songs are no protection for him anymore. But remember what he was using them to protect himself against. Certainly a cold world that didn't love him, but even more certainly, he was using it to protect himself against the ultimate reality, which was the love of the God who pursued him. I think I'm getting a little back flexion at the top of that swing. Sorry, extension. Is thy love indeed a weed, howbeit an amaranthine weed suffering no flowers except its own to mount? Quickly switching images yet again. I told you, this whole section, he goes one image to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. He doesn't spend more than a few lines on each one. Remember very back at the beginning of the poem, he said, "For though I knew his love who followed, yet was I sore adread, lest having him I must have naught beside." Oh, come on. My timer stopped working. Remember back at the beginning of the poem, he said, "For though I knew his love who follow it, yet was I sore adread, lest having him I must have naught beside." He continues this complaint, or he re-expresses this complaint of a love that is so powerful that it seems that it blocks out all other loves. Is thy love indeed a weed, albeit an amaranthine weed? So amaranth is a flowering crop that we sometimes put in gardens. The seeds can be used as grain, but the plant itself has these big, broad, spreading leaves. That cover the earth around them and shade out other plants. Useful in a garden, actually. Reduces the amount of weeding you have to do. Is thy love indeed a weed, albeit an amaranthine weed, suffering no flower except its own to mount? My freshness spent its wavering shower in the dust. A brief single line continuing this gardening image. My freshness spent its wavering shower in the dust, and now my heart is as a broken fount, wherein tear drippings stagnate, spilt down ever from the vague thoughts that shiver along the sighful branches of my mind. The dank thoughts, not vague. He goes from this gardening image of God's love as a weed that shades out all the other weeds, straight to my freshness spent its wavering shower in the dust, meaning as a young boy, as a young man, he had this brief span where he could have watered the ground, he could have created life, and yet he spent this brief period of energy on dust, on nothing. So now his heart is like a broken fountain. It doesn't sprout up, it doesn't spray water all over the place. Tear drippings stagnate. Nice to see my right arm's finally warmed up. 30%, 60% of the way through the workout. Tear drippings is all he can manage now. He doesn't have a shower anymore. Teardrop, but they stagnate. They don't go anywhere. They stagnate, spilt down ever from the dank thoughts that shiver along the sighful branches of my mind. He's going to go on to going to go on to another image of such is what is to be. Such is, like this is the way things are, what is to be. The pulp so bitter, how must taste the rind. Like, things are bad. He's looking at his life. He is hopeless. He has no human prospects whatsoever. He has no human friends. And the one friend that he could have, and by all rights should have, the friend that is God, he's been running from. And now God has him captured and cornered. And he's here. This is what we, in modern terminology, we would call rock bottom. The pulp so bitter, how must taste the rind. An interesting image, because typically we get the rind out of the way before we start eating the pulp of the fruit. But he's done it backwards. He's dug into the pulp and he still hasn't cleared the rind. It's an image that he's going to leave unresolved. Because he's immediately going to go on to another. I dimly guess what time in mists confounds. Yet ever and anon a trumpet sounds from the hid battlements of eternity. Those shaken mists of space unsettle then round the half-glimpsed turrets, slowly wash again. We're going back to the Arthurian knight errantry images. That we've seen a little bit previously. Imagine a mist, a wanderer riding through a mist so thick he can't see anything around him but vague shapes. But he guesses. He guesses what those shapes are. Trees, mountains, castles, other men, God. I dimly guess what time in mists confounds. It's time by its very nature that hides God, that hides the spiritual world. But also in a sense reveals it. Yet ever and anon a trumpet sounds from the hid battlements of eternity. A wanderer is walking through this mist, and periodically he hears a trumpet sounding through the mists. And mist being a chancy thing that it is, sometimes he can't tell which direction it's coming from, but he knows it comes from the hid battlements of eternity. Those shaken mists, a space unsettle. The trumpet sounds, it chases the mist away for just a second, and he can see what lies beyond. around those half-glimpsed turrets slowly wash again. He sees the castle for just a moment, appearing out of the mist, and then the mist comes back. But not ere him who summoneth I first have seen and wound. Last swing set. It's a very timid set of swings. Yet not ere him who summoneth I first have seen, enwound in glooming robes purpureal, cypress crowned. The trumpet sounds, the mists part for just a second. He sees the turrets of the castle, and then the mist washes over. But before it washes over, he sees not a castle, not a thing. He sees a person. Him who summoneth. This trumpet call is not just a random, hey, we're here, we're gonna blow the horn. This is a summons. And not only is it a summons, he sees the person who summons. It's not a king waiting deep inside the castle somewhere, sending his minions out to, summon back all the wanderers. Let me know when they get here. This king is waiting on his own turrets, watching for the wanderers to return. Not, I think, unlike the prodigal son, where the father rushes out to meet the returning prodigal. In gleaming robes purpureal. Purple robes are the sign of the emperor, cypress crowned. He's wearing the traditional wreath around his head. And that's something I probably should have researched, is the significance of cypress specifically. I've always understood the Roman emperors to be crowned with olive, but Thompson doesn't use images by mistake. It would have made just as much sense rhythmically to say olive crowned as cypress crowned. There's the same emphasis on syllables. So there was a reason he chose cypress, and frankly, I don't know what it is. And yes, I know some people pronounce it Cyprus. I'd always thought of Cyprus as the island of copper in the middle of the Mediterranean off the coast of Italy. Anyway, neither here nor there. But not ere him who summoneth I first have seen and wound, in glooming robes purpureal, cypress crowned. His name I know, and what his trumpet saith. This is not a stranger. Remember, way back at the beginning, we heard the lament, all things betray thee who betrayest me. But betrayal is not a crime of strangers. Betrayal is a crime of friends. You cannot betray somebody that you do not know. And again, Thompson confesses, for though I knew his love who followed, yet was I sore adread. This is not a stranger who's following him. But here we come to something that could potentially be a mere poetic oversight, but in a poet of Thompson's caliber, I'm not sure that that's the theory we should go with. Is he's been followed by something, by someone, and yet as he comes through the mist, he looks up and he sees ahead of him this king standing on the turrets. Who or what is it that was following him when he knows that it was actually this king who stands before him? And there's potential, I think, given his Catholic background, I think that there's some Trinitarian imagery here. Is that it is the Father who comes out to greet, it is the Son who comes out to meet, and it is the Holy Spirit who pursues and remains with you no matter how far. Where can I run from your love? If I fly to the heavens, there you are. If I sail to the sunrise, or if I fly to the sunrise or sail beyond the sea, even there your love shall find me. Thompson is aware of all this. This is part of his heritage. It's part of his artistic, his psychological, his spiritual makeup. And he touches on it. He hints at it in passing, but he doesn't hammer it home. He's not heavy-handed about it. It's there for people who have the same heritage to find, but it's not. You have to understand that he was writing to a non-Catholic audience. Perhaps that's not accurate, because he sent them to a Catholic magazine, which would, one would assume, goes to a Catholic audience. He was writing in a non-Catholic milieu. The culture of England at this time was non-Catholic, though a good deal more Catholic than most Catholic countries are now. Times change. His name I know, and what his trumpet saith. Whether man's heart or life it be which yields thee harvest, must thy harvest fields be dunged with rotten death. It's his final reproach against the pursuer, against this person who's come out to the castle battlements to meet him. His final reproach, must thy harvest fields be dunged with rotten death. So that's all for today. I'm going to stretch out, do my pull-ups. Like I said, I'm running a little bit late this morning, so I got to get moving. We're going to, I think, look a little bit deeper into a couple of specific lines from this section next time I do this, because the final line of this section, must thy harvest fields be dunged with rotten death, is, I think, in many ways the point of the whole poem. And we'll talk more about that next time. Anyway, that's it. Hope you enjoyed the workout. I hope you enjoyed the talk. If you did, hit like, hit subscribe, do all that jazz, and we'll see you next week.